You made it inside. The door is shut. The outside world is glowing in all the wrong ways. The dust is falling. The air beyond the walls has trust issues. And for one brief, fragile moment, you feel something rare in nuclear survival. Relief. That is adorable, because surviving inside a fallout shelter is not the same thing as being safe. It just means the apocalypse has moved from fire and pressure to logistics and other people. You are no longer fighting the blast, the street, the skyline, the burning city. Now you are fighting time, ration math, stale air, stress, bad leadership, sanitation. And Greg, there's always a Greg. Welcome to the fallout shelter, a sealed box of fear, body heat, uncertain supplies, and social tension, with just enough concrete to keep the radiation from immediately winning. Let's see how long you last. Character spawn. Before we begin, we need to determine your current build. Are you in a real shelter? In a basement pretending to be one? In a subway tunnel with excellent branding? In an office lower level with no plan and bad fluorescent lighting? In a private bunker owned by someone who definitely mentioned this possibility too often? Statistically, you are not in a luxury survival compound with filtered ventilation, medical supplies, calm professionals, stored water, stored food, backup power, and a social contract stronger than panic. You are in whatever passed for shelter at the exact moment. The world became a cautionary tale, which means your current survival advantages are likely walls, luck, and the fact that the outside is worse. But let's be generous. Let's say the structure is solid. Congratulations. You have unlocked indoor apocalypse mode. Level 1, who gets in? The first problem with any fallout shelter is not radiation. It's the door. Because the second the shelter becomes real, it stops being architecture and becomes ethics with hinges. Who got inside before it closed? Family? Neighbors? Strangers? Children? The injured? The useful? The loud? The owner? The person with the key? The person who decided they were now in charge because they own a flashlight and a tone of voice? And more importantly, who did not get in? This is where apocalypse gets intimate, because nuclear survival fantasies always imagine the shelter as the solution. They rarely dwell on the doorway, the banging, the pleading, the argument over capacity, the split-second decisions that future guilt will preserve in perfect detail. Every shelter story begins with a filtered version of violence, maybe physical, maybe moral, usually both. The people inside survived the threshold. The people outside became memory, noise, or a reason no one wants to make eye contact. And just like that, before rationing even begins, your shelter has acquired grief, resentment, hierarchy, and unresolved human math. Excellent start. Level 2, air, water, and other things you took for granted. Now that you are sealed in, you begin noticing something strange. The shelter is full of people. This turns out to be a design issue. People consume oxygen. People produce heat. People produce moisture. People produce smells. People produce carbon dioxide. People produce opinions. The last one is often the most corrosive. In a confined shelter, air becomes less a background feature and more a developing relationship. If ventilation is poor, every hour matters. The room gets warmer, heavier, closer. Breathing becomes something you notice, which is rarely a good sign. Then comes water. Everyone needs it. No one can improvise it. And suddenly the entire room starts mentally converting survival into sips per person. Who drinks first? Who gets less? How much do you save for tomorrow? How much is tomorrow allowed to matter? When everyone is thirsty now, civilization likes to pretend. It runs on ideals. Put enough scared people in a sealed room, and it becomes very clear that civilization runs on airflow, water, and whether anyone is still pretending fairness is easy. Level 3, ration politics. Food time, which is not exciting, because exciting food is not shelter food. Shelter food is canned, dry, stale, rationed, and spiritually disappointing. This is where people discover that hunger is not just physical, it is emotional. Everyone starts counting, not loudly at first, quietly, internally, with the specific paranoia of someone who has just realized that every cracker is now a political object. How much food is there really? Who counted it? Can they be trusted? Did someone bring private supplies? Are they sharing? Should they have to? Is one person eating more? Are children exempt from strict fairness? What about the elderly? What about the injured? What about the person who insists they need more because they are handling security? Now your fallout shelter has become a government, a tiny, overheated, underqualified government made entirely of frightened civilians, and one guy who keeps saying, "We need order," like that has ever calmed a room. This is the brutal little secret of shelter survival. Scarcity creates ideology fast. Level 4, sanitation, the real villain. Let's talk about toilets. No one wants to, which is exactly why this becomes a disaster. In most survival fantasies, people imagine food, water, radiation, maybe intruders. They do not imagine what happens when a sealed group of humans must relieve themselves repeatedly in limited space, with limited plumbing, limited cleaning supplies, limited privacy, and rapidly declining patience. But the body is committed to realism. If the plumbing still works, you are lucky. If it does not, you are now inventing sanitation policy. Inside a fear box, waste management becomes urgent, not glamorous, not cinematic. Urgent, because poor sanitation means smell, contamination, disease, arguments, humiliation, and the total collapse of whatever fragile dignity this group was still trying to maintain. This is where the shelter stops feeling like refuge and starts feeling like biology under siege. Nothing resets human social status faster than a room full of scared adults trying to decide who has to clean the waste bucket. Radiation is outside, but inside, the real villain has entered through the digestive system. Level 5, cabin fever DLC. Time passes strangely in confinement. At first, every minute matters. Then hours blur. Then people stop asking what time it is, because time has become insulting. You are in the same room with the same people, the same smells, the same walls, the same bad lighting, the same half-charged devices that no longer feel like part of modern life. This is where the mind begins to fray. Little things become enormous. Someone chews too loudly. Someone snores. Someone talks too much. Someone cries too often. Someone asks when it will be safe again, as if repetition might produce science. The shelter has become its own weather system. Tension rises. Humor dies, then returns in meaner form. Claustrophobia starts selecting targets. A stare lasts too long. A whisper feels hostile. A private conversation becomes suspicious. A minor disagreement about food placement acquires the emotional energy of a border conflict. Confinement does not invent conflict. It concentrates it. And in a fallout shelter, there is nowhere to walk it off. Level 6, leadership patch notes. Every shelter eventually asks the same question. Who is in charge? This is a terrible question, because the answer is almost never. The most qualified person with broad trust, calm judgment, and crisis management experience. Usually the answer is closer to the loudest person, the owner, the oldest, the person with supplies, the person with keys, the person who sounds certain, or the person everyone dislikes least. which is not the same as competent. Shelter leadership is brutal because the job description is impossible. You must ration fairly, maintain calm, make decisions with incomplete information, control conflict, preserve hope without lying too much, and somehow keep Greg from opening the door just for a second. Leadership under confinement is not about charisma. It is about absorbing blame faster than morale collapses. And blame will come. Too much food used, not enough food used, too strict, too soft, too secretive, too honest, too cautious, too slow, too willing to listen, not willing enough. By now, the fallout shelter is no longer just a shelter. It is a tiny failing state with bad air and no exit strategy. Level 7, someone is sick, then it happens. Someone coughs. Not a normal cough. Not an I'm fine cough. A cough that changes a room. Now everyone looks up, because when you are trapped in close quarters, illness is not personal anymore. It is communal dread. Maybe it is stress. Maybe smoke inhalation. Maybe dehydration. Maybe infection. Maybe radiation exposure. Maybe panic presenting as physical collapse. Maybe all of the above, because the apocalypse and joys overlap. Once sickness enters a shelter, everything changes. People pull away. People whisper. People start watching symptoms, like amateur detectives in a very bad timeline. Who sat near them? Who shared water? Who touched what? Are they getting worse? Should they be isolated? Where? With what space? With what supplies? With what authority? This is one of the ugliest shelter mechanics. Compassion begins competing with fear, and fear, under scarcity, is an aggressive negotiator. Level 8, the door temptation. Sooner or later, someone says it. We can't stay in here forever. Correct. Deeply unhelpful, but correct. The shelter creates a paradox. Outside is dangerous. Inside is deteriorating. At first, staying inside feels like survival. Later, it starts feeling like waiting, then like imprisonment, then like a dare. This is when the door becomes psychological, not just physical, symbolic. The door means fresh air, answers, escape, family, proof, movement, possibility. It also means radiation, contamination, exposure, panic, and potentially bringing the outside problem directly back into your sealed little misery box. The urge to open the door is not irrational. That is what makes it dangerous. People do not break shelter discipline because they are evil. They break it because uncertainty burns through the human brain faster than hunger sometimes. A sealed room can protect the body. It does much less for imagination. And imagination, trapped long enough, starts writing very bad plans. Level 9, trust collapse. By now, supplies are lower, tempers are shorter, sleep is worse. People smell historical. This is when trust starts failing. Not dramatically at first. Quietly, someone hides food. Someone lies about how much water they drank. Someone says they are fine, while clearly not fine. Someone overhears something. Someone accuses someone else of taking more than their share. Someone insists the leader is hiding information. Someone thinks the family in the corner has been favored the whole time. And the terrible thing is, some of these accusations may be true. That is what makes distrust so effective in confinement. It does not need to be completely irrational. It only needs enough evidence to spread. A fallout shelter depends on cooperation, but cooperation is not a natural state. It is maintained through fairness, through communication, through visible sacrifice, through shared rules, through the exhausting work of making scared people believe that suffering is at least being distributed honestly. The second that belief breaks, the shelter does not explode. It fragments. And fragmentation in confinement is one of the fastest ways to turn survival into a social autopsy. Level 10, hope management. At some point, the shelter stops asking, how do we survive this? And starts asking, how long does surviving this have to feel like this? That is a much harder question, because humans can endure a lot if the timeline makes sense. Hours? Fine. A day? Terrible but survivable. Several days? Now morale becomes infrastructure. Longer? Welcome to the collapse of emotional architecture. Hope inside a shelter must be managed carefully. Too little hope, and the room goes dark internally. Too much hope, and people start taking reckless action to speed reality up. This is why confined survival is not only about resources, it is about narrative. What do people believe is happening outside? What do they believe will happen next? What do they believe all this suffering is for? If the answer becomes nothing, discipline starts to rot. And once discipline rots, everything else follows. Because in a fallout shelter, hope is not inspiration. It is structural support. Final boss, the sound at the door. Then one day, or one night, or what passes for time in concrete, you hear something at the door. A knock, a scrape, a voice, a cry for help. Maybe real, maybe imagined, maybe someone who made it late, maybe someone desperate, maybe someone contaminated, maybe someone dying, maybe just the building settling, while everyone inside is one nerve away from chaos. And suddenly the entire shelter becomes that decision. Do you open it? Every argument returns. Compassion, risk, fairness, fear, exposure, humanity, math, because that is the final cruelty of shelter survival. It is not enough to endure the confinement. You must also decide what kind of people you are becoming inside it. The fallout shelter was supposed to protect you from the outside world. Instead, it locks you in a room with the hardest part of any catastrophe: other humans, yourself, and choices you cannot make cleanly. That is the real shelter experience, not victory, containment, survival stats, radiation shielding, helpful, personal comfort, revoked, water security, fragile, sanitation, hostile, leadership quality, variable, mental stability, declining, social trust, cracking, door discipline, critical. Would you respawn here? Only if you enjoy drinking according to committee, arguing about waste buckets, and learning that the apocalypse is mostly people trapped together, trying not to become worse. Inside a fallout shelter, 3 out of 10 stars. Better than outside. Worse than almost everything else. Concrete can block radiation. It does much less. For panic, boredom, shame, and Greg. Spawn history. Games have never been fair.